الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So today inshallah ta'ala we'll be starting a new hadith from this series of Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, and we have reached hadith as-sabi wa thalathun. This is the 37th hadith. 36? No. Okay, sadis wa thalathun, so the 36th hadith in this series of Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. So inshallah ta'ala, as we'll normally do, that we'll have the hadith read, and then we'll start to discuss the hadith in the system that we normally follows, which include takhrij of the hadith and also kalam and other matters pertaining to the hadith and the benefits and the ahkam that can be extracted or taken from the hadith. So first we'll have the hadith read, and then we'll go through the hadith discussion.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Hadith number 36, the virtue of reciting the Quran and remembering Allah together. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم قال: من نفس عن مؤمن كربة من كرب الدنيا نفس الله عنه كربة من كرب يوم القيامة. ومن يسر على معسر يسر الله عليه في الدنيا والآخرة. ومن ستر مسلما ستر الله في الدنيا والآخرة. والله في عون العبد ما كان العبد في عون أخيه. من سلك طريقا يلتمس فيه علما سهل الله له به طريقا إلى الجنة. وما اجتمع قوم في بيت من بيوت الله يتلون كتاب الله ويتدارسونه بينهم إلا نزلت عليهم السكينة وغشيتهم الرحمة وحفتهم الملائكة وذكرهم الله في من عنده. ومن بطأ به عمله لم يسرع به نسبه. رواه Muslim. On the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever removes a grief from a believer from amongst the sorrows of this life, Allah will remove a grief from him amongst the sorrows of the day of resurrection. Whoever brings ease to one in difficulty, Allah will make easy for him in this life and the hereafter. Whoever covers a Muslim, Allah will cover him in this life and the hereafter. Allah is in aid of the servant so long as the servant is in aid of his brother. Whoever traverses a path seeking knowledge, Allah will make a path to paradise easy for him. No people gather in one of the houses of Allah, reciting the book of Allah and studying it amongst themselves, except that tranquility descends upon them, mercy envelops them, the angels surround them, and Allah mentions them amongst those who are with him. Whoever is slowed down by his actions will not be sped forward by his lineage. Related by Muslim with this wording.
So that's the hadith is mentioned, so the hadith have been read, and the hadith read in Arabic and English. So inshallah ta'ala, now we go through discussing the hadith. So after first of those things that we normally mention is that we find that Al-Busiri, that I've mentioned some takhrij brief we mentioned, قال Busiri regarding this hadith, that the author mentioned رواه مسلم بهذا لف, that indicating also the hadith of other wordings, but the wording that has been chosen is the wording of Imam Muslim rahimahullah ta'ala. That I mentioned قال Busiri in adding to this hadith regarding the source of the hadith or takhrij of hadith mentioned رواه الترمذي في الجامع وقال حديث حسن. So this hadith also they mentioned by as mentioned by Busiri, that this hadith is also collected by Imam at-Tirmidhi in his Al-Jama'. So as for others who have discussed regarding takhrij of the hadith, that they have mentioned regarding concerning that this particular hadith, that many books have collected this hadith. So many who have collected or mentioned this hadith. So amongst them they mention Imam Muslim in his Sahih. Also of those who have collected this hadith, Imam Abu Dawood in his Sunan. So of those who also have mentioned this hadith in their works, Abu Dawood in the books of hadith, Imam Abu Dawood, and mentioned hadith several places in Sunan. One place, Abu Dawood, he mentioned hadith muqtasar, just a portion of the hadith. Nam, and then he mentioned the hadith somewhat more in detail, mentioned the full hadith. Then also of those who have collected this hadith, At-Tirmidhi, as mentioned. At-Tirmidhi also have this hadith a few places in his Al-Jamaykee, where at one place is mentioned hadith mukhtasar, and also in places complete, or the full hadith. Then also An-Nasa'i in Sunan Al-Kubra. So An-Nasa'i in Sunan Al-Kubra. Also of those who have narrated the hadith, Ibn Majah in his Sunan, Ahmed in his Musnad, Ibn Abi Shayba in his Musannaf, and others, Ad-Darimi, and others, Al-Hakim in his book Al-Mustadrak. So this book is somewhat mentioned, and also even mentioned that some of those books that somewhat are dedicated to the Quran, that I've also mentioned this hadith. So amongst those books, somewhat I've dedicated more regarding matters pertaining to the Quran, Al-Ajuri in his book Hamlatul Quran, and also Akhlaq al-Ulama. So also he has a book regarding of those I mentioned Hamlatul Quran concerning the sifat and the adab of those who are said in the bearers of the Quran, I mean those who have the memorized of the Quran, that so he'll mention what are those adab, what are the akhlaq that is expected from those people who have memorized the Quran. Then also he has a book concerning Akhlaq al-Ulama, where it is concerning us now what are the characteristics and the behavior of the ulama. Also this hadith is mentioned. And others that they have mentioned, Ibn Hibban, who have mentioned this hadith. So this hadith I've mentioned, as we state, in many places, but those of some of those who have mentioned this particular hadith. With this hadith, of that have been mentioned regarding this particular hadith, that they have stated, as we have mentioned before, or I'll mention in brief before. So regarding concerning this hadith, we mentioned the hadith is, as mentioned, the hadith in Sahih Muslim, in his Sahih. So the hadith in the Imam Muslim in his Sahih. And as we have stated that Imam Muslim rahimahullah ta'ala, that of his condition, amongst the condition that he had stated, that any hadith that he mentioned in his book, after the Muqaddimah, that is hadith Sahih. But of the ulama, that some of the ulama have somewhat, in reviewing Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, that they have somewhat highlighted or mentioned a certain hadith that they somewhat have mentioned in Taqada, that they have somewhat criticized several hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. So a few hadith in Bukhari and Muslim that they have criticized. So of those who have, so they have mentioned that this is one of those hadith. So this is one of those hadith that some have somewhat have mentioned regarding concerning the hadith, that when Imam Muslim rahimahullah ta'ala, when he mentioned the hadith, that he stated in the hadith concerning with the isnad, where he mentioned concerning Imam Muslim called an Al-Amash, and Abi Saleh, and Abi Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, and then mentioned the hadith. So this hadith covered the isnad. So you have Al-Amash, who have stated this particular hadith. So you have Al-Amash, who have stated this particular hadith. Then from Amash, he narrated on Abi Saleh, and Abi Saleh, and Abi Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu. So they have mentioned regarding concerning with this particular hadith, and why some have mentioned about this flag of this particular hadith, that when it is stated regarding concerning that Al-Amash, he said to be of those of the narrator who are said to be, that of those who are said to be mudallis. So Amash, amongst those narrators who are said to be mudallis. So they mentioned that so a mudallis at times, that whenever they relate a hadith and they use the word like an. With me? So more detail. So a person who said to be mudallis from the narrators, that when he uses the word al-an, such and such person, and use the word an, such and such person is teacher, that they kind of somewhat seek to see if there's other narration where you have somewhat use clear words that he heard the hadith from his shaykh by using the word hadathana or akhbarana or the likes. So the word an is one of those words that at times can be ambiguous with people who are mudallis. So it could mean, the word an being used at time indicate that he may have heard the hadith. So they mentioned regarding concern with this hadith also that there's a narrator that that in some of narration it mentioned regarding concern that Al-Amash, that he narrate on someone and that person narrated and they mentioned that so he mentioned that on another person. But they have mentioned that also somewhat. I've mentioned that it possibility it could have word narrate upon another person. But I mentioned in some of the narration of hadith, like in this isnad in Abu Dawood and also in Tirmidhi, that he sarraha, that he mentioned call haddathu an Abi Saleh. So use the word haddathu an Abi Saleh.
Yeah, A'mash.
So Amash can someone use the word clear words that he heard the hadith directly from Abu Saleh. So they can somewhat remove any form of that question regarding did he hear the hadith or not. So this can somewhat confirm that he did hear the hadith directly.
Sorry, I just want to point to this one, Modellis. Is it from Tadlis? Like
From Tadlis.
Try to hoodwink or like fool people, basically. Is that what it means in
And there's another person trying to fool. So Tadlis is of those terminology within Ilm al-Hadith. So you have and there's a long discussion regarding hadith or Modellis. So with this matter regarding concerning was so Tadlis that they mentioned regarding concern that the word how it is used amongst ulama of hadith, that they mentioned a Tadlis of Tadlis al-Isnad. That a Tadlis that where general concern the Tadlis is concerning ikhfa al-aib fil hadith. So a person can somewhat try to conceal some aib, some fault in the hadith. But what they will do so in a case of Tadlis Isnad, so the ulama regarding Tadlis, that they put it into two broad categories. So of Tadlis, they mentioned Tadlis, this will fall into Tadlis al-Isnad. By way of a Tadlis al-Isnad, so you have Tadlis al-Isnad and Tadlis al-Shuyukh or Asma. So with Tadlis al-Isnad, when I mentioned that al-Rawi al-Muhaddith قد التدليس أن الراوي قد يروي عن من لقيه, that he have narrate upon someone that he have met and heard from, وسمع منه ما لم يسمع منه, what he did not hear from him. Meaning that a narrator, that he have this teacher, that he have heard some hadith from him. So the student, he has this teacher, in this case we will say Amash, Sulaiman ibn Mahran, Amash, that he have heard from Abu Saleh. So that's his teacher. So you have heard from him hadith. But he have narrate a hadith at times from his teacher Abu Saleh, hadith that he didn't hear from him directly. He heard through a third party. Clear? So you have Amash and his teacher Abu Saleh. So Amash did hear from Abu Saleh. But in some occasion, at time, is at Tadlis that he may have heard a hadith through or narrate upon Abu Saleh a hadith that he did not hear from him. But in general, he heard from him. But he's narrating a particular hadith, this hadith that he heard that he's narrating, he did not hear from him. Rather, he heard from another party that goes back to Abu Saleh. But when he narrates the hadith directly on Abu Saleh, he used terms that are somehow, we said, that ambiguous, but kind of sound like that ihtimal. It could go this way or that way. It's not clear that he heard from him directly, this hadith. With me? So that's concerning Tadlis. So it's not present. So that's concerning, and they said, it can be said that in Ilm al-Hadith, it considered to be of those, as they said, is a form of, in some occasion, it's a form of sakt, a break in Isnad, but they said it's khafi. It's sakt, khafi. So you have those type of breakage in the Isnad. There's a disconnection in Isnad, but it is zahir jali. It is clear. Al-inqita, in general, al-hadith al-mursal, hadith al-mu'allaq, these are clear that there's a breakage in the Isnad. But Tadlis is somewhat more subtle. That make it more difficult for a person to detect. You require a person who is well-founded in ilm al-hadith for them to can detect it. A well-grounded person to can detect it. So mention that, but after rule that they have, we said because of Amash, did hear from Abu Saleh. But in this narration, in this isnad, it mentioned an Abi Saleh. Are there other isnad that can indicate that he used the word haddathana or akhbarana, indicating that he did hear directly? Because those words indicate he heard directly and doesn't at times. If the person is mudallis. If the person is not mudallis, then it indicates that he heard from him, then it is a word that is taken as he heard from him directly. But with the case of the person who said mudallis, then that's a different rule applies to them, even though they fall into different categories. With me? Am I losing everyone?
No.
Okay. So you have other narration of the hadith. As I said, the narration of the hadith in the At-Tirmidhi, in one of the isnad in the Tirmidhi, wa Abi Dawood, that indicate that he heard from Amash. Sorry, that Amash heard from Abu Saleh. We use the word haddattuhu an Abi Saleh, that I'm narrating it from Abi Saleh. And that's in the Tirmidhi wa Abi Dawood. So I show that he did hear the hadith from Abu Saleh. So that question, that red flag regarding, or yellow flag of tadlis is now removed. It's now removed. So after the way of removing it, when a person uses wordings, or those that said wordings or terminology that indicate that he heard the hadith directly. Nam. So matters regarding at-tadlis, an important area of those abwab in ilm al-hadith that needs to be studied for the person to be clear regarding what are the rules that pertains to at-tadlis. Then, so said that of those ulama, so said it's not of those who have criticized the hadith because of that matter. So you find some hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, where people, some narrators, not say the word people, but some of the narrators, because these are narrators in most part, that they are a'imma, the huffaz. So these are narrators that at times some may be of those who are within the group or class as those who are mudallis. But the narrations that they have hadith in Sahih Bukhari. So you might find that in some cases people might have a question regarding those matters, but we said to know that, so in this case, of this particular case, that red flag is removed because other sources prove that he heard the hadith, the same hadith, from Abu Saleh directly. So of those who criticize the hadith, one of those ulama, so you have of the ulama of past who have criticized the hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, with specific, of those, we have Imam ad-Daraqutni. So of the giants of ilm al-hadith is Imam ad-Daraqutni. So ad-Daraqutni have a book that we have mentioned before that is called Ilzamat al-Tatabbu. So he has two works. Now, the one that is more in question regarding Tatabbu. So Tatabbu, we mentioned in hadith that he criticized that are in Bukhari and Muslim, not according to their condition. I mentioned that so those two books are two separate books, but they're somewhat mentioned together. So you find that Shaykh Mu'min bin Hadi al-Wadi', that when he was doing his master's thesis in Medina University, that was his thesis. He did that, checking off those two works, and it's in print. Even though you find that, so with that work, you have, like I said, of some of the Mashaykh I've mentioned, that others who have done some work further on that book. So they mentioned that, so I said Shaykh Muqbil, based upon that did some work on it, but then you find others of contemporary, after Shaykh Muqbil, have done some further work on the book of Tatabbu. And so the book is about, just say, one volume, a normal volume like this. That's the work of Shaykh Muqbil. Then you find that someone have come and done some work on it, is now 4 volumes. So if a person in al-hadith, then that book will be something valuable for a person to look at as to that discussion regarding those ahadith that are in particular criticizing Bukhari and Muslim, and in our case, Sahih Muslim. But overall, that of those who have criticized ad-Daraqutni, amongst them is with more renown amongst the ulama who have criticized hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, or questions on the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. And it doesn't mean that those questions mean all the hadith that their question is daif. It doesn't mean that. With me? So it doesn't mean by one questioning and maybe looking, investigating further, in some of those hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, it means that the hadith is da'if. And those things regarding questioning or investigating hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, that go back to the kibar ulama al-hadith, not just anyone. So the people who have done those work are people who have that discussion and can open that discussion. We only accept it from the people who are kibar ulama of hadith, of past and present. Not just any person who have a love for hadith or want to talk about Bukhari and Muslim. That's unacceptable, because I've said most of those things are very, what's the word I'm trying to find? Some of the more intricate matters of ilm al-hadith. And most of those things are not about the isnad, it's not about the matin per se, not the text of the hadith, it's more so the isnad. So it's a very intricate matter. With me? So not anyone, so you find that people sometimes in today like to criticize Bukhari and Muslim, that they are rijal. Yes, we understand they are men. You understand? But when they did this work, or when any of the ulama of hadith that have compiled a book or put a book together, they have certain criteria, something they are working with as criteria. So it's to see, okay, what first is their criteria that they are working with for you to criticize them? What's their condition of the book that they're working with? So they have a system that they're following. So if you're going to criticize their work, then you have to criticize it based upon the system that they have in place. Not based upon something that you're going to just make, put together, and not knowing their criteria. So, I would say that a lot of people that they try to criticize Bukhari and Muslim, you understand, because they're the most authentic collection of hadith. So if you can criticize those and get away with it, then everything has become easy. Everything has become easy. So, but then you find the ulama of the sunnah that one of those people kind of somewhat raise their head, they kind of somewhat refute them. And most of those people, most of those people are not people who are known to be, you understand, themselves specialists in hadith. They're not the top ranking in ilm al-hadith. So most of the time, they just can't create fawda, but still need to be clarified. So of those, back again, so we have Ad-Daraqutni. Then we have, of those, they have Ibn Ammar, Shahid, Ibn Ammar, al-Shahid, that also, Al-Harawi, also have a work around Bukhari and Muslim. Also you have Abi Mas'ud al-Damashqi, and Abu Ali Ghassani, Ghassani, that all of these have some work regarding Bukhari and Muslim, regarding some hadith that they believe that needs that they kind of somewhat study further, seen regarding these hadith, are they according to Bukhari and Muslim condition. So you find that with some of the hadith that I mentioned, for example, At-Tabarani in his book Al-Awsat, that when he mentioned this particular hadith, he mentioned hadith that he mentioned with his study concern, Rawahu min Tariq al-Hakam ibn Nufail, an Amash, an Hakam, an Abi Saleh. So meaning that At-Tabarani, when he narrates this hadith with his isnad, that he mentioned that an Amash. So he mentioned Amash in the isnad. So the hadith can somewhat, you said, Madar yadur hawla Amash. He's like the center person of the isnad. And Hakam, and Abi Saleh, and Abi Hurairah, radiyallahu anhu. So that is included that there's a wasita, that there's someone between Amash and Abu Saleh, who's Hakam ibn Nufail. Now that's some narration, but some narration shows that he heard the hadith directly. Clear?
Yeah.
So the one that we have mentioned before, we mentioned the Haddathani, show that he heard the hadith directly, but others mentioned that there's a wasita, so that becomes the area of discussion between the ulama. But at Tirmidhi and Abu Dawood, all that the one that narration he heard directly, it is also valid. It's the valid Sahih Isnad.
But there's some shuyukh say that it's definitely somebody in between A'mash.
In some narration, so either sometimes a person may hear the hadith two ways. Now, some with a wasita, and some direct. It's one of his shuyukh, Abu Saleh. You understand? So in some narration, it is narrated of Tabarani that there's a person that is Hakam in between him and his sheikh. But other narration that indicate that he heard the hadith, also the same hadith directly. And because it used the word haddathani, or in that narration, show that he did hear the hadith directly, this particular hadith. So it's still within the hadith that you have heard directly from the sheikh, but some mention that there is a wasita, a person in between. Nam? But that criticism doesn't impact or critique that it's a valid criticism of the hadith. It's not a valid criticism of the hadith. So that's concerning that matter regarding that discussion. So I mentioned a takhrij general, because I said takhrij general, that the ulama have said takhrij of two parts. Al-Awzu, al-Isnad, where a person has somewhat or the hadith, they try to reference by the hadith to its primary sources. That's Awzu. Then at takhrij, the second part of takhrij, the person passing a judgment on the hadith. Is the hadith authentic or not? If the hadith inside Bukhari and Muslim, then the most part, then that's a ruling on the hadith that is already that it is authentic. So as for the hadith that is mentioned, so you find that Ibn Rajab also mentioned what we have just discussed. Also, the thing of the hadith, that we go to some of the narration in Abu Dawood with Tirmidhi in their wording that they mentioned when he say concerning Rawahu Muslim bihadha al-lafth. Rawahu Muslim bihadha al-lafth, meaning concerning this narration is being mentioned here. This is the wording of Imam Muslim. But also in other sources or other books of hadith, and like in At-Tirmidhi, his wording of the hadith, so the wording continue mention. He mentioned man nafasa an akhihi. At-Tirmidhi, his wording is man nafasa an akhihi. So the wording of Muslim, man nafasa an mu'min. So a substitute word in some narration is the word akhihi. Naam, rather than the word Muslim. In Abu Dawood, that his wording is rather than the word mu'min, man nafasa an Muslim. So the wording of Abu Dawood is the word that his narration mentioned the word Muslim, not the word mu'min nor akhi. So you find those words which is the general meaning is the same. The general meaning of those wordings that they are the same. So Muslim mentioned mu'min, Abu Dawood mentioned Muslim, Tirmidhi mentioned akhihi. So that's said that those words I mentioned that so all of them have the general same meaning, general same meaning.
How do we basically arrive at what is right? Because some people can be like, because there's disparity between those words, mu'min, Muslim, and akhi. There's
Those wordings that there's no conflict in those wordings.
no.
You understand? Those wordings, there's no conflict in those wordings. So the word Muslim, mu'min, akhi, you understand, concern that all go back to al-iman. So the word concern that the ulama mentioned, as may have said before, that they have mentioned that if the word in farada, so if the word Muslim or mu'min is used by itself, then it take the meaning that it take a general meaning. It takes a general, so where it includes, so if you use the word Muslim, it include mu'min, or if the word mu'min is used, it include Muslim, every Muslim, male and female. So those words, if they're used by themselves, al-mu'min or Muslim, then it takes a meaning concerning everyone who's affiliated to Islam, regardless of the level of their iman. But if both words are used together in the same sentence, then they take a different meaning. If both words are used together in the same sentence, then they take different meaning. So it says another word concerning al-mu'min, al-muslim, akhi, that it revolves around the same thing regarding al-Islam. With me? So, aywa. So, the next of those things that also with this hadith that as mentioned by Ibn Rajab, that also this particular hadith also have where he said shawahid. So the hadith meaning shawahid, or shawahid meaning that's not of our use, more common in latter ulama, that shawahid, that you find other Sahaba who have narrated this hadith. So you find that the hadith that we have is the hadith of Abu Hurairah, but also you find other Sahaba who have narrated hadith which is similar. Now, either whether in full or in portion, with the same general or part of the meaning. So they mentioned of the hadith that Ibn Omar have narrated hadith with somewhat similar, where his hadith mentioned Al-Muslim akhul Muslim, la yuzlimu, wa la yuslimu, wa man kana fi haja akhihi kana Allah fi hajati, man faraja al-Muslim فرج الله عنه قرب من قرب يوم القيامة الحديث ومن ستر مسلما ستره الله يوم القيامة. So that hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. So that's a part of the hadith that was mentioned. So that's they said that would be a shahid, and it's going to somewhat coincide with some of what is mentioned in the main hadith of Abu Hurairah. Also, they mentioned that there's other, Ibn Ajr mentioned is another narration on Ka'b ibn Ujra. So Ka'b ibn Ujra, of his that he mentioned, Man nafasa al-mu'min. So again, Ka'b ibn Ujra also have another narration of that hadith in the Tabarani. Fi kalam, even though there's some kalam in that particular narration, so that that one in Tabarani, fi kalam. So they mentioned that fihi Layth ibn Abi Sulaym huwa da'if wa Shu'aib. So there's some kalam regarding, but there's some kalam, but shahid in general. Also they mentioned a hadith of Salama ibn Mukhallad. Salama ibn Mukhallad, among the Sahaba, also narrated a similar hadith. So those are the shawahid of this particular hadith. So of the shawahid of this particular hadith that have been mentioned here by Ibn Rajab. Also they mentioned the hadith of Bara ibn Azib. Also they mentioned Inna Allaha fi awn abd ma kana al-abd fi awn akhihi man faraja al-mu'min al-hadith. I mentioned man faraja al-mu'min aw mu'minatin. So it can somewhat, so that's concerning. We said those other hadith, they serve as shawa'id. Well, you can somewhat supporting hadith of the main hadith. Other Sahaba that have narrated a hadith which is similar to the hadith being discussed. Those shawahid that are sometimes mentioned, or shawahid of the hadith, that help kind of somewhat at times, they will help to give a more, to help better understand the hadith. So one hadith sometimes may help in giving a more clear explanation of hadith. So at times hadith may explain another hadith. So that's what the ulama put emphasis on, that inaya in trying to look at other shawahid to see is there anything that may give some more clarity on the hadith. Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala, when he mentions hadith, that before we go to Nawawi regarding Hamiyat hada hadith, the manzila hada hadith, so the position of the ulama have taken, the importance the ulama have given to this hadith. So the importance the ulama have given to this hadith. It is stated by Nawawi, قال وحديث عظيم, that he mentioned this hadith is something which is important, جامع لأنواع من علوم والقواعد والآداب. That is particular hadith that is a great hadith, a significant hadith. That this hadith, it kind of it gathers various sciences and various benefits of that concerning ilm, ulum, wal qawahid, wal adab. So this hadith can somewhat as well discuss, it can somewhat go into various topics. So this hadith covers various topics as to be discussed. So I mentioned that in it, ulum, regarding encouragement regarding ilm, fi concerning qawahid, principles, and also adab, and also matters regarding the adab, the manners of the Muslim and character of the Muslim, and also others have mentioned something similar. So Ibn al-Mar'i, he state wa hadithun jalil, jami' li kathir min fawaid. That is hadith is something which is a hadith which is a great hadith, and it comprised of many benefits. It have many benefits. And others have mentioned other statements that are but over the next of those things, that the hadith, the mawdu of the hadith. So the mawdu of this particular hadith, that in the book translation, the subheading is, that I have the subheading for the hadith, or the title,
The virtue of reciting the Quran and remembering Allah together.
So they mentioned that the virtue of reciting the Quran and the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, two things of what is mentioned. Now, Ibn Rajab, when he kind of somebody was said put a like consider mawdu' or the topic of this hadith, he mentioned that he states regarding this particular hadith that هذا they mentioned concerning من نفس المؤمن قربا من قرب الدنيا نفس الله عنه قربا من قرب يوم القيامة قال هذا يرجع إلى أن الجزاء من جنس العمل. That is the hadith of those who mentioned this hadith is discussed concerning that al-jaza min jins al-amal. So you have a principle between the ulama, a qaida between the ulama that they mentioned that al-jaza min jins al-amal. A person is rewarded according to his deeds. A person is rewarded according to his deeds. So the person is rewarded according to his efforts. As we say, a person is recorded according to his efforts within that effort. So that hadith can somewhat give that meaning. And I mentioned, you find that there are many texts regarding those things. As for what is covered in this hadith, that this hadith covers regarding concerning various topics. Various things are covered in this particular hadith. One, it mentioned tanfis al-qurb, that the Muslim kind of somewhat removing difficulty from his brother. Taysir ala, making things easy for others, people in difficulty. Also he discussed concerning satar, regarding concerning matter regarding that a Muslim that cover the fault of his brother. Also he discussed on this hadith ta'awun ala al-khair, that the one try to work supporting each other in things of al-khair. Also the hadith it discussed concerning al-shafa', the dhuhaja, that those people that to mediate on behalf of those who are in need. And also the hadith also it covered matters of talabatul ilm, the virtue of seeking of knowledge. Also the hadith it discussed concerning matters regarding inayah bil Quran, that giving attention to the Quran. And as we mentioned the hadith also regarding concerning al-jaza, that a person is recorded ala amal la ala an-nasab, that a person that ansab, that a person is rewarded according to his action, his deeds, his efforts, not because of his lineage. Not because of his lineage. So a person didn't understand. So he said lineage, or where the person is. So those things are not the primary factor. Is the person action. So that's concerning what is covered in this particular hadith. So it covered several points. So as for the general meaning of hadith, as mentioned by Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, that he mentioned and now called considered hadith that covered matters regarding فيه, as we mentioned, فضل قضاء أواهج المسلمين, that it showed the virtue of trying to fulfill the needs of the Muslims or aiding the Muslim. نفعهم بما تيسر من علم, also kind of somewhat trying to benefit the Muslim regarding of knowledge. And that so assisting the Muslim regarding with your person's knowledge, with a person if he has wealth, with assisting others in whatever way possible, also directing people towards good, giving a nasiha to other Muslim. Also of the hadith concerning fadl, that it showed the virtue regarding the meaning of the hadith, showed that the Muslim, that satar al Muslim, that he tries to cover the fault of a Muslim, not to expose him unnecessarily. And also the person mashi ila talabat al-ilm, the person going forward in seeking of knowledge. So it's the effort in seeking of ilm. So effort in going out to seek of knowledge, and also ijtima' ala tilawat al-Quran, and also people coming together to read of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He mentioned fil masjid or fi ghayri masjid. So this can be something that is done whether in the masjid, or the ulama mentioned outside the masjid. So the thing that, and we discuss concerning ijtima' ala tilawa, but also go beyond a tilawa. which is concerning that, as we'll discuss, that of sometimes people put the emphasis regarding tilawa and not the other aspect of the Quran, which is understanding the Quran, acting upon the Quran, that so all of this, they go together. And also I mentioned, man battaha bihi amalu lam yusfa bihi nasabu, that the person is somewhat that doesn't put effort in giving action and doing action, that his lineage will not benefit him. So the person who does not put effort regarding doing action and put effort in doing things, then regardless of your lineage, it will not benefit you. Your lineage will not be enough. So some people, that shows so he said a person needs to be involved in doing things. So effort, or I said personal effort, is required from all. Personal effort is required from all. So that's concerning the hadith. Concerning those points regarding, as we have covered today, the recite of the hadith being mentioned, takhrij of the hadith, the different wording of the hadith, and also what have been said by the ulama pertaining to this particular hadith, regarding its virtues, and all the ulama, the importance that are given to this particular hadith. Also, we have mentioned that of the ulama who have criticized this hadith, but then that criticism is not per se that one which is detrimental to the hadith at all. It can be explained. And also, we mentioned that of the ulama who have somewhat discussed somebody's hadith. We mentioned Daraqutni is the more renowned amongst them. And these ulama, they are special in the ilm al-ilal. So a person will say that discussing these matters, which again concerning of those intricate matters and meticulous matters of ilm al-hadith, ilm al-ilal. Which is ilm al-ilal is the person finding what most does not see. That's ilm al-ilal. So those things which is said, those things that are maybe would be missed by most is what the person is able to detect. And that's ilm al-ilal. So it's not even in today's time that of recent years that there's a lot more effort regarding this aspect of ilm al-hadith, ilm al-ilal. So you have now more books. They are now taught as a topic in institutions and discussed more than before. Much more than before. So ilm al-hadith that discussed much more than before, but also in particular ilm al-ilal. So you find a certain people that the ones that today that excel in ilm al-hadith is because of this area. The one that will excel today in ilm al-hadith because of the emphasis that they place, or says that because of research that they have put in this particular area where they have excel in ilm al-hadith. So that inshallah ta'ala will just bring today to an end and continue next week. Just somewhat to go over the points that have been mentioned, the benefits that can be taken overall from the points that have been mentioned from this particular hadith. So that inshallah ta'ala will end. وَبِاللَّهِ تَعَالَى تَوْفِيقٌ وَهَادِي السَّبِيلِ وَالْآخِرُ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ. Okay. من أي من طلبة العلم الحديث أو إنسان مشتغل بعلم الحديث يستفيد منه. So he asks about a particular individual. That person amongst the science of hadith is known to have done several works that of two types. Books that he has edited, meaning concerned, said books that he have checked, which is work done by others from the ulama of past, and he can somewhat put the book, check those books and put them in print, and also his own works. So it's a general concern to know, la bas, he can benefit from his works. One question. A second. Amash. No, yes, I said, as you have between you and others, between him and others. So what I mentioned was that's where the discussion lies from Amash and what goes after.
It's not the first time I've heard his name.
Said of the thing that Akam said, one of those famous of the Ruwat. You understand? So one of the important narrators are well known, but when a person reads the books of hadith, then certain names they're repeated a lot. They become familiar with those. Name Amash, one of them. So I said, well, we'll mention just part of the isnad, not the full isnad. We'll just kind of somewhat start they mention the part where the discussion lies.
When we use the terminology in English and we say that we criticize, for example, when you're speaking about this topic, is that really the best word to use? Because criticism basically can mean two things unless it's not given some sort of explanation. Meaning, they could be criticizing it in a way which is praising, and which shows disapproval. So which one is it? When you say they're criticizing, and they're criticizing to say, okay, this is the situation, and we disapprove of this because of this. So it's a criticism of dispraisal, basically.
Sometimes criticism, I said, in the case that we discussed, is more concerned that they see that the hadith is not to the standard of Bukhari and Muslim as they have laid down. So a form of that said, not in a, it's pull, instead for another word to said, is like trying to pull up Bukhari and Muslim. So for them, it's a form of criticism in a negative way. You understand? But it doesn't mean that criticism means the hadith is da'if. It's just that this hadith that we're criticizing is not according to the condition that you have laid down. So it makes it forfeit of the condition that you have laid down for this book. So on that basis, we're criticizing that you didn't fulfill your condition. So we are bringing that to your attention. So it says some of those criticisms, as I said, so sometimes the word that in hadith, sometimes you use a word that in English maybe a bit, you understand, that sometimes we said to know that it mutakallim fi. So the hadith is on the discussion. But sometimes it means that it can be that there is a dispute between the ulama regarding that hadith. So sometimes mean the hadith mutakallim fi, it could mean the hadith is da'if. And so the final result, the hadith mutakallim fi, we said the hadith mutakallim where? Yes, you might find that some may hold the hadith to be maqbool, and some hold hadith, so maqbool mean accepted, sahih or hasan, or some may take the hadith to be that mutakallim, it is a weak. But you might have, but in the end result, it could be that the hadith is weak. The final result, it is weak. So sometimes, but it's a concern, so the person understand that to first, that there's a discussion, and then the final result. So sometimes the words of these fields, so like every science, the term that they use goes back to that science. It goes outside, the term goes outside the general linguistic meaning. With me? So those words that in each field that they have, that when they use them, it will be understood in as to how it is used in that field, not in the general linguistic meaning. Because they have, like in every science. That's why I say you have like ilm al-mustalah, to give an idea concerning what these words means. Nam, so the word tadlis, dallasa, nam, linguistically, nam, ikhfa al-aib. Oh, it means concerning that so, but is not intended. So now, but they give it now to the people, hadith will give it now a more, they may add to that meaning. So you find that also in the books of usul al-fiqh, that, or books in fiqh, when you read a book in fiqh, that certain words that are used that understand what it is intended in that science, or sometimes in that madhab, because each madhab sometimes have their own terminologies. Shaykhan, who's Shaykhan in the Shafi? Who's the Qadi with the Hanabila? Who's the Qadi with the Hanafi? Who's the Qadi with the Maliki? Who's the Qadi with each madhab? So each madhab will have a person referred to as Al-Qadi. But in that madhab, they know who they're speaking of. But don't see Qadi in the Hanafi as the Qadi in the Shafi. So it's known each term as to how it is intended by the people that is using it.
So it leads to my second part of the question. When you're saying that these ulama are giants in a specific field, are bringing attention to something that Muslim has done, are they of the understanding that Muslim doesn't know what you think Muslim didn't know that he was doing what he did?
No, the preset of those criticisms said that, like I said, academic critique of things or critiquing of things. So it's not to is not that the person didn't know. Is what the conditions are and what is in front of us. So, for example, hadith sahih. What's the condition for hadith being sahih? Taib. So we said, okay, if we say hadith is sahih, we have these criteria. Now, so if we feel a hadith, said, okay, this hadith, does it, in any book, does it fulfill those criteria? So the author who may wrote a book and said, everything in my book is authentic. For example, in contemporaries. We have a book that, for example, Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah ta'ala, have a book, As-Sitra Sahiha. In his judgment, whatever he grade in there as sahih, that's sahih with him. Not necessarily with everyone else. So anyone going to look at the book and say, okay, Shaykh Al-Albani said hadith is sahih. I'm going to judge him. What is hadith sahih? What is the criteria for hadith to be what? Sahih.
But according to him, though.
No, that's his reason. For example, Shaykh Al-Albani always wrote a book. And you have many, but that's as an example. So he said everything in this book is authentic in this book. So we see, yes, that's according to you who have put that book. But it doesn't mean, but say, okay, now to critique him, to see is what he's saying correct or not, how we do it. To say, okay, we know what is hadith sahih. Either he have laid down that in this book, for hadith to be deemed sahih, these are the criteria. Or is working with an already established criteria. Clear? Says, okay, what's the established criteria? Because he didn't stipulate any criteria regarding the book that he's putting together. So what we know to be, what is hadith sahih? So I said, okay, these are these 5 conditions. We list them. So we go to say, okay, let's see if everything he mentioned in this book fulfill those criteria. So go through each hadith, one by one, case by case. I understand. So, and I said, no, because everyone is at the end of the day, is what? Bashar. Now, that the person might, you understand, said, no, he might come to a conclusion, a particular hadith, where another might see different, because the general criteria is clear. As for what fulfill the criteria, then that becomes the area of discussion. That clear? So we have the criteria for hadith sahih 5: ittisal, dabt, adala, adam al-illa, adam al-shudhud. So we know that everyone agree upon a criteria. But which hadith fulfill these criteria now becomes an area where you might find in some cases a difference. You have a particular narrator, you see him as sahih, another person don't. Because there's kalam of those who praise him and those who speak against him. So what's going to be that person's final conclusion? You may differ. With me? So the rules are agreed upon. Now the application, at times, in some cases, you might have a difference regarding now fulfilling those criteria. So it goes back to say, so that one Sheikh mentioned so I said, yes, the person, then said when Imam Muslim wrote the book, that they mentioned that some narrators that he may have in Imam Muslim and Bukhari view, that the point that I get this narration of this person is with me, thiqah. With me, from what I know of him, he is thiqah. But for another person, Ahmad al-Hanbal and others may, for example, in this case, disagree with him on this particular person. But for him, his conclusion is thiqat with me. But that person may know, come to know something that maybe he was not aware of, possibly. So sometimes you have those areas that for the person, yes, I think him to be trustworthy, but for another person, not to the degree that you see him as. But that area of difference. Plus also they mention that there's criticism for us, we see it as, not as something which is a negative. For us in Islam, the ulama is see it as something positive, that the ulama show that Imam Muslim wrote his book and we just said everything, we just become blind and said, we accept everything. There's always the process of verifying and checking. Every century, it is done. To prove that that book is it to the standard that we claim it to be. So there's constant checking. You understand? It does prove that the book is as sound as it said, because most, you understand that the criticism in most part, they're not that strong.
So would that have happened? Does that sometimes happen in the time of Imam Muslim? Does that happen in that time?
Of?
That in the time that Imam Muslim compiled his works, do people check it in that time?
Aim said he put his book to other people, and some people, and Bukhari Muslim, that they have put their works to other of their shuyukh to see what they agree. And some of the ulama, because sometimes they mentioned that have criticized a few hadith. You understand? So the process always exists.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm
You understand the process? It always exists. So said that process. So that even that all of so the process existed from then and still continue through regarding that verification. It said as not everything everyone agree upon. You understand? Not everything everyone will agree upon. So that's and again, someone should that regarding this process regarding of taqleed, even concerning the matter regarding that the matter concerning at-tasih and tadhif, that of saying hadith authentic or not, is not something that we should kind of somewhat blind follow a particular individual, because there's still some degree of ijtihad. Ijtihad, they're coming to their conclusion from their research, and you might find in some of those cases differences may occur. So you might find that an alim of our time, of contemporary, he said that I wrote a book, everything is authentic. That's according to him. That's according to him. Who's to say that there's not others who may disagree with him with some of the hadith in this book? And that will only be known if it is studied, or a critical study of the book is done by others who are qualified. And that it still exists. You might find, for example, that the ulama of contemporary time, that you might find that of the ulama of contemporary time regarding hadith. Now, that you might find that some that believe that everything, and how some behave at times, that everything that Sheikh Fulan says authentic, khalas. Everything that Sheikh Fulan says authentic, khalas, intahat al-amr. And they will not present, and we might find that others disagree, may have ruling different, that may criticize on a ruling that Sheikh Fulan, that they all, everything he says is okay. But that's only, you understand, but the person take off if one can that see the larger picture of things, and see that ilm is something which is an ongoing thing. That the ilm is an ongoing thing. Then they will not have that approach, and see that the science, what are concerning in matters of fiqh, where if there's a room of some areas of that you might study a book today in fiqh, and yesterday, last week you studied that book that you agree with that particular view. You studied another book in fiqh, and you come up to a different conclusion. There's things that the other book may have bring to your attention that you kind of somewhat overlooked before, and now you have to look at it from a different angle. And you may change your view. And that occurs. Really, my fans said that if you find a talib, or all the view that he has, for example, he studied a book that covers 1,000 masail. He studied a book that covers how many? 1,000 masail. And he came out with the conclusion, those 1,000 masail. And 20 years after, he hasn't changed in none of those views. It's rare you find that, rare. Rarely. Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi, Ahmed had different views, change their views at times. After, had a view at one point, then change later, due to sometimes information that comes that is different. That you may have to relook at that matter and may come to a different conclusion. But say we find a person who have 1,000 matters 20 years ago and still haven't changed in one thing, rare. Rare.
I want to know if that happened in the time of Imam Bukhari, Muslim, if that happened to them.
Now
The
that
same way it happened to Imam Ahmad, Shafi'i.
if that happened to anyone, so that any I'm saying that you rarely find a person who take a view, all his view that he has, and haven't changed anything after 20 years.
Yeah. Is there books on that? That Imam Muslim had this criteria, and then in his time
No, that-
studying, writing, doing.
Now that in Hadith, because in Hadith studies, you understand that we said like in matters regards to even Hadith studies that the ulama, for example, Sheikh Albani, you understand that at one point of certain views and then later on change them. You understand? So I said that's you'll find with every alim you'll find something similar. He said that Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani, that when he left Imam Abu Hanifa, he changed. He said many of his views. Yes, and you have Imam Shafi. They said that he has Qawl al-Jadid. There are certain views that he had that he changed. Wal Qadim. So I said it's something which is so that knowledge is a process that is a process that you will find that you may change some of your views. God said those rules of ijtihad, something that will not change because they are the usul. But in certain matters, that a person yesterday may have a view and tomorrow he changed that view. Last one.
So you mentioned on that point
Which point?
about changing the view. Then mentioning Shaybani, it was the student of Imam Abu Hanifa, making way after.
No, the student said,
You see the one when he went to Medina, and he said, if my sahib, if he had known many of the things I know now, he would change many of his views.
as I'm saying, that indicate that the alim changing of views. You understand that you have come to, when he came to Medina, we find that in the environment of Medina you have more hadith. You understand that he came to the people that when Medina, that al-hadith of, Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani, he became one of the riwat of Muwatta. He became a narrator of Muwatta, so he listened to the Muwatta of Imam Malik. You understand? So he's now become exposed to more hadith that he was, before when he was in Iraq with Abu Hanifa, they had less hadith.
He said if Abu Hanifa
And that is true so he says that maybe if I change that, perhaps my sheikh may have changed also. You understand? So sure to know that changes does occur.
So the Sheikh would have cultivated him.
Hey, so the way that it was cultivated that, you understand that is ittiba al-haq. You understand? With dalil. And sometimes you may change your view, that occurs. Hey, so next week inshallah ta'ala, wa billahi ta'ala, tawfiq.